So in this chapter, I want to talk about reincarnation. Crazy idea, right? How could I be someone other than me? But interestingly, a ubiquitous idea in most spiritual traditions around the world, including Christianity, early Christianity. So what I want to explore in this chapter is, does it seem like a crazy idea because it's just impossible? Or is it a crazy idea because we haven't understood it in a plausible way? And that part of my mission in this pod book is to find new ways to understand old ideas. Now, one of the things we came across with the idea of immortality generally was, oh, well, look, there's no evidence. There's nothing to explain here. And I suggested, actually, there's loads of evidence. It's just about how we understand that evidence. That's what's at stake. And the same here. People think there's no evidence for reincarnation, and it's simply not true. And I'm not going to go through the details in this chapter. That's not my job. But go out and have a look, because it's fascinating. There's lots of evidence. Again, the question is, how do we explain the evidence? A good place to start is the University of Virginia, where they've been studying reincarnation for 50 years. They have around 2,500 individual cases that they've studied. Mainly this is children between the ages of 2 and 5. And of those cases, around 1,700, they have solved, in the sense that they have checked out the particular details these children recall, and they've turned out to be right. 92% of memory statements have turned out to be correct. That's incredibly high. Now, as you might expect, this is more common in Asia. Estimates are 1 in 500 children, but before the age of 5, remember a past life in Asia. That's a huge number, by the way, isn't it? But it's also prevalent in the West, in Europe, in America. And some of the most striking stories that I've come across have been Western. I'm thinking of a young boy who started having nightmares of being shot down in an aeroplane and recalled being shot down over Japan, knew the name of the aircraft carrier, knew the name of his friend who was another pilot, and many, many other things, all of which turned out to be right. There's examples of kids being able to be tracing who they thought they were, the adults or the researchers, as in the case of the University of Virginia, until they got photos and going, do you recognize anyone in this photo? And they'll give them lots of different photos. And they go exactly for the right photo, and they go, oh yeah, that was my friend Charlie, and that's me. Something needs to be explained here. Now, with everything, there's lots of different ways we could explain this. But let's start, maybe, with the obvious, which is, well, maybe it's what the kids say it is. Maybe the kids are telling us what it is. They've lived a previous life, and we should take that seriously. And instead of just dismissing it, we should go, how's that possible? What does that mean? Another little bit of evidence that I find interesting is that, according to a study in 1993 by Wells, that 70% of people who experience a near-death experience, who die and come back believing in reincarnation. And that's cross-culturally. That's not just in the East, that's everywhere. So something about that's happening there is like, oh yeah, you see that you have had many lives. So maybe you have. How can we understand it? Well, this is where I've got to, and it's only the beginning. But I think it's worth sharing. I've discussed that I think we need to understand the immortality of the soul as simply the continuation of the process of becoming that an individual is, a system in the process of becoming, that functions on the levels of the psyche and biology, we're psychobiological systems, and when the biological bit fails, when that's not sustainable, it continues on the level of the psyche. One way we can see reincarnation is simply that system on the level of the psyche re-engages with the lower levels of emergence by coming into what I think of as a symbiotic relationship with a biological system, such that the psyche, which contains all of its past, including its previous lives and previous bodies, and comes into a symbiotic relationship with an arising biological system, in this case, a human embryo. And they form one system. And this is a form of, like everything, it's a natural evolutionary adaptation. It is part of solving the problem, which is the survival of the individual. So the individual survives in the imaginos, but then needs to re-engage with the biological, with the material, and comes into the relationship with an emerging biological system, and they form a new integrated system. Now, to make that sound plausible, let me put it like this. If I came to you now and went, I've got an outrageous idea. Look, I think your biological body is the result of an egg from your mum and a sperm from your dad, and they came together, and then there's this information called DNA. And the DNA information in the sperm and the DNA information in the egg, they come together and they merge, and they form a new form of DNA that's never happened before. And that is evolutionary advantageous, better than just cloning where you keep the same DNA. It's better. And that's what created your body, the meeting of these two bits of information. Well, what I'm saying is the same thing, but on the next level, which is, so there's now the biological information starting up, and then there's this imaginal or psychic information on the next level, which is coming into forming a psychobiological system by coming into a symbiotic relationship and then forming one system. And it has evolutionary advantage because it's bringing the passivity from the soul, which has done the round before, to the new system. And that will impact it as it comes into the world. And I suspect we see that all the time. We see that particularly writ large with children that suddenly have these amazing abilities they shouldn't have. Now, there may be other explanations, of course, but this is one. And in some small way, I do wonder whether it was true for me when I had my awakening at 12, which had there was nothing about my upbringing to suggest that would happen. But when it happened, it just happened spontaneously, and it felt familiar, felt like I knew it. And one of the ways that we can explain that is that I did know it, and that my lifelong obsession with awakening, spirituality, was because I'd had this obsession before, or this was a continuation of something that had developed before. And that may be true for you, it may be true for most of us in different ways. All right, so what I'm suggesting here is that the whole process of what I've called psychosymbiosis, just to avoid the word reincarnation, which is a kind of a tricky word sometimes, the coming together of an old psyche and a new body to form one new system, it's an evolution of evolution. Now, I've touched on this before. The biological level of evolution is not evolution. The whole material physical universe has evolved, and there's nothing to do with DNA and natural selection involved in that. That's a new form of the evolutionary process that creates all the species of nature. And it's very good at creating species because it throws up new possibilities, and the old ones die off, create room for the new and the better. Very good for species, terrible for individuals. So the survival of the psyche is a way that the individual process of evolutionary becoming doesn't end with death and can continue. And what I'm suggesting is that part of that process has been a re-engaging with the biological level through psychosymbiosis or reincarnation, which continues the evolution of the individual, which is the leading edge of the process of this 14 billion year becoming. Okay, so what have I been saying? I've been saying, look, there's actually loads of evidence that needs to be explained. Of course, there's many ways of explaining it, but one of them is to take it on face value and just believe the kids, because it's nearly all kids up to the age of 5, maybe 7. And what they're saying is, oh, I lived before. Well, maybe they did. We just need to understand it. And the way we can understand it may be that it's an natural evolutionary adaptation whereby the psyche, which has now evolved to be able to survive the death of a body, re-engages with another biological system to continue that journey. In doing that, it's now going in the same way that when the body died, it looks like the psyche can really experience that level far more vividly because there's no biological passivity. When it re-engages with what is very, very foundational, primitive level of biological passivity, just developing in an embryonic form, then it will lose all of that. The memories will go. There may be some memory for a while, but with nearly all of these kids, by the age of 5, it's completely gone. And that this is part of the next level of evolution. Evolution of the physical world, evolution of biological species, evolution of individuals, which is the evolution of the soul. And that's the leading edge, and that's what we're in. Why do we reincarnate? Well, I don't know. The old idea is that we need to escape the wheel. That's a very negative version. We need to get away from this and back home. I don't think we're going back somewhere. I think, well, that's the twist, isn't it? I think overall it's an evolutionary process, but as we have been in the Imaginos before, if reincarnation is to be taken seriously, there's a sense in which it's coming back home and it's remembering a more emergent place. But we have reincarnated, and like a wheel, it's gone round. But it's not a wheel to escape. It's a wheel which is enabling our evolution. Maybe we fall asleep, as it were, into reincarnation, just like now, where I can't sustain being awake for too long and, I've got to go. Maybe it's like that. The spiritual literature suggests it might be. Maybe we can also choose, like with sleep, where I go, do you know what? I'm going to go to sleep now because it'll be better if I do that. Maybe we can choose. Maybe we can choose to do it as a gift, like the Bodhisattva tradition in Tibetan Buddhism, where because you know it's all one, you want to reincarnate in order to bring wisdom and love into the world. Maybe all of that should be taken seriously. What I'm urging is that we see there are plausible, rational ways to understand reincarnation in an evolutionary context, and that therefore, rather than dismissing it as just crazy, we should explore it to see whether it is actually revealing something about this amazing process of becoming that we're in. Okay. There's plenty there, I hope, for you to contemplate. But before you do that, let's just feel it out, as it were. Just for a moment, just be conscious that you're you in this life. Like I'm Tim. But see it for a moment that you're on a bigger journey, that this life is like a chapter in a book that goes back and back and back. Other chapters. And we'll go forward. And each of those other chapters have been other parts of the story of you. They're all you. And you are your past. They're all your identity. And for a moment, imagine that when you experience the death of the body, the end of this chapter, you may see all of that and put this chapter in a completely different context of being part of this huge journey of becoming, of realizing ever more emergent possibilities, which is what existence is and what you are. Before I tell you about where we're going next, in the next chapter, I want to add a little coda to this chapter. And that's to explain why I don't go into a lot of the evidence for things like reincarnation or near-death experiences and so forth. And it's because I don't want to get potentially bogged down in individual cases. And in this chapter, some of you may realize the example that I used is the famous James Leninger case. I'm not sure how that's pronounced, but I think that's right. A young boy who has this experience of remembering being a pilot in the Second World War. And it's a great example of why I avoid going into individual cases, because it's a very strong and very interesting story. And yet, people who have an agenda against reincarnation have come out and done an analysis in which they've claimed to debunk this. So you will come across people going, it's been debunked. And then after that, other researchers have gone in and done a very careful rebuttal of the debunking. They've debunked the debunking. Now, I am not an expert in that area. So it is absolutely pointless for me to get involved in arguments about an individual case. And that's why I don't, in this pod book, hang what I'm saying on an individual case, because I'll end up getting involved in arguments that I'm not qualified to comment on. What I want to do is go, look, without doubt, there's a lot of evidence for survival of death, reincarnation, and so forth. Each individual example could be questioned, of course, maybe should be questioned, of course. But overall, there is a body of evidence. If you go out and research it for yourself, you will hear these voices speak to you. And it's much more powerful than me just telling abstract stories which are not rooted in my own experience. My role is to try and say, what's the best way to explain this? And as I've been suggesting, it feels like the place to start could be, well, maybe what they say is happening. Could that be plausible? Can we understand that? All right. So I've been sharing a lot of ideas in this pod book, and there's a lot more to come. It's big and comprehensive. But for me, everything I do philosophically is rooted in a profound sense of how mysterious this experience of life is. And that's what I want to explore in the next chapter.